Parks will be another fight. What is it, 60 years later?
Ms. Richardson's leadership in Cambridge defies every stereotype about women in the movement if one looks at and learns from it. You see that picture, famous picture of her with the bayonet, you know, I mean, the idea that the brothers were on the front lines and the sisters were, you know, making chicken or something. You know, there she was, you know, defiant, militant, but also the sharp economic analysis and the demands that you all made there, you know, dispelled any myth that people just wanted integration or just wanted to sit down on the bus. No, this was also an economic struggle, and you articulated it brilliantly in all kinds of ways.
And then
Just want to sing, toot your
about,
horn a little bit.
okay, people talk about the Cambridge movement. Actually, it went across the eastern shore of America. Some of the cities on the eastern shore, rather than have all of this turmoil, they segregated their stores and began to do those kind of things in 4 or 5 of the other towns. So it's Cambridge that is supposed to be so peaceful and we love our black folks and that refused to do anything. So I think one of the things that people may miss is that in the end, it did in fact cover the whole eastern shore and on, which a lot of people who came from the northern student movement thought was just like Mississippi.
And Jean, do you want to talk a little bit about Rosa Parks? You could also talk about Ms. Richardson. I think basically what we have is like some historians to be like, we will tell you. Yeah. About it.
Yeah, sure. It's
Yeah.
I mean, doing Rosa Parks, right? None of us come into this room without knowing who Rosa Parks is, right? And now, probably most of our kids, most of our younger siblings, right? You learn about Rosa Parks in elementary school now. But the version we learn about her, and I think we've been talking about this today, is such a distortion, both of her life, but also of what it took, of the trajectory of struggle. So, for instance, every elementary school kid now learns that Rosa Parks was courageous, right? She refused to give up her seat on the bus. Except that what made that courageous is actually not part of the story. And I would argue part of what makes that courageous is, and we've been talking about this today, is the courage of perseverance. Rosa Parks, by December 1st, 1955, has been an activist for more than a decade. She actually gets her start when she meets and marries a politically active barber by the name of Raymond Parks, and he's working on the Scottsboro case in 1931, and so that's where she begins. And in the first years, he's sort of the more out front activist, and she's more behind the scenes, and that's going to change. And by the 1940s, she is looking to be more active, and she is galled by the fact that black people are being asked to serve in World War II and not registered to vote at home, and are able to vote at home. And so she joins the Montgomery NAACP, and she and a militant union activist by the name of Edie Nixon will spend the next decade transforming that Montgomery's NAACP into a more activist branch over the objections of many of the middle class members of the organization. And they try to unseat Nixon and Parks and are not successful at that. And one of the issues they're working on in those years is criminal justice in a number of different ways, both in providing representation to people, and particularly black men who are being falsely accused of crimes. And there are many cases, and they're trying to find legal representation because there are no lawyers that will take these cases, and they're trying to provide support. And they're also trying to make the law actually receptive to black people, and particularly white brutality against black people and white sexual violence against black women. And so they're also working on any number of cases trying to support and draw attention to and try to make the law responsive to cases of rape of black women, Gertrude Perkins, Recy Taylor, So they are doing many of these cases. They're working on black voter registration. They're working on issues of school desegregation, and it is an incredibly depressing time. And she gets more and more discouraged. And she goes to Highlander Folk School the summer before her bus stand. And it's a very transformative experience, in part because there are all of these other people there. It's a 2-week workshop on school desegregation, and her spirit starts to lift. But nonetheless, on the last day, like any good organizer training school, they do the go-round. They say, what are you going to do when you go back home? And she says, there will never be a mass movement in Montgomery. Because it's the cradle of the Confederacy, and because black people won't stay together, and she says, so I'm going to go home and keep working with the young people. So basically, when Rosa Parks leaves Highlander, she's in some sense kind of starting to give up on her generation and putting her hopes in the spirit and energy and militancy of young people. And so when we think about that iconic day, that December 1st, 1955 day, and I think in a few months we're going to have the 60th anniversary and there's going to be all sorts of coverage. But I think what we want to think about in that day is the courage of perseverance. Because she made stands like this before. She'd been thrown off the bus before because she refused the practice that bus drivers would ask black people to pay in the front and go around the back. So she had resisted on the bus before. She had taken stands before. Other people she had known had taken stands before. Her neighbor, Hilliard Brooks, had been killed for resisting on the bus in 1950. Another woman in Montgomery in 1944, Viola White, filed a case after she was arrested on the bus, and in response, the police raped her daughter. So when Rosa Parks makes that decision that evening, right, unlike the way that we're taught, even unlike, I think, the revisionist narrative of Rosa Parks, that decision is a decision where there is nothing to suggest that this stand is going to be any different. And there is a lot to suggest that something very terrible, right? She knew all sorts of people who lost their jobs. And so I guess, to go back to this question of one myth, I think the myth is actually the ways that we talk about courage, and that we forget that part of like what courage actually looks like, and I think in Ella Baker's case, in Ms. Richardson's case, is the courage of doing things again and again and again, right? And without the knowledge that this time, right? I think sometimes the way it gets taught, it's like the heavens open up and you know it's the moment, and they're like, sit down, keep sitting, right? But in fact, that's not how it happened. And so I guess if I was going to get to say one thing, it would be that making sure that when we talk about these things, we remember that these movements that went before, the movements we are in today, also struggled with the very same exhaustion and the very same needing to do it over and over and needing to sort of have faith when the signs are not necessarily there.
I think as a follow-up, I mean, something that came up when all of you were speaking was an issue around class. Thinking about Rosa Parks feels that things aren't going to happen because middle-class blacks and working-class blacks can't necessarily be united on certain issues. I think in Cambridge.
We just enjoy the middle.
Okay, middle-class blacks. So talk to us about this. Talk.
There were people, within the economic structure in Cambridge of blacks that were there, that were able to work hard and, start buying a little house and all those things and what you want your children to do. When the movement got started, they stopped speaking to us. And were totally against us, I guess. And I think that was happening all across the United States. So whatever your socioeconomic status was within the confines of your town, and while in another town you may be making even more money, that class thing still protected itself. In Cambridge or the Eastern Shore, there were it was the lower economic class. That had nothing to do with their intelligence, alertness, and ability to fight. But that carried that on. And I remember that I was at a SNP conference, and Howard Zinn told us, which I did not understand then, and maybe just after, as I've gotten older, thought about it. But he said, you all need to set up some kind of strategy, because the things that you won, you know, that people have won for themselves, they're going to put those middle class people in your town in good spots, and they go back. And that is true, and that is true for Cambridge today. But I think that the people that were organized, they had different roles. Some of them could only maybe on weekends, when other people came into Cambridge from the north to prepare, you know, to feed them. Or if some people came in to help for a week or two, they kept them in their houses. They may not appear on the picket line, or so there were at least 10 other roles. Our young people at that point were running the, only thing I can think of now is the only Secret Service. But they had ham radios and walkie-talkies, and they kept us informed of what the police were doing and stuff on their equipment. Of course, today it's much more sophisticated. So there were different roles. Everybody wasn't in the streets, although a lot of people were. And she's right about class. I don't know what. As soon as the poverty programs came out, about 3 years later, and they were having good jobs, they started speaking to us. People across the country would write to me about, you know, poor people don't know what to do. They can't run these agencies. We need those jobs. Can you recommend me? No. No, because we say, I'll buy you something. So I think there's a possibility. There were so many people in the street this winter. I don't think that class structure will have any impact, but you probably need to keep an eye out for whatever you achieve, that they won't be there. I mean, you have black men on TV now supporting police that have killed kids.
I think that,
And the president and the mayor of Baltimore calling them thugs.
yeah. Well, I think that's where the class politics
Yeah.
come in now. I mean, that, and, you know, again, every historical moment is different, and, you know, otherwise historians are out.
And that's in for head in the mind, because there's cell phones and stuff now. People are taking pictures, you can see what happened. When we came along, we couldn't, it was, you know, through mouth and whatever. But you can see when it's happening there. Although I think I saw it somewhere the other day that people's minds are beginning to change because of what they see, what people are taking pictures. But also they know that, because I understand that the guy in Ferguson that was with, there's so many names.
Mike Brown.
Mike Brown, was arrested, and the police treated him badly because he had said what had gone on. And then another one that had taken a picture of him said, well, I have to be careful.
I think you're right about the broadness of the movement now, and, you know, you had
No,
doctors for Black Lives, lawyers for
Yeah.
Black Lives, historians for Black Lives. So, I mean, I think there is a broad kind of engagement of people in different sectors, but I think the politics of respectability, which is part of what you're talking about, is still very profound, and I think we saw that in the Ferguson coverage, where there were the bad folks who were breaking curfew, and the good folks who had ties on, who came out in the morning, and I mean, there was a real sense of, you know, more militant actions
And
put
then there's
people
that-
outside of the bounds of a certain kind of class. But can I just say this? I want to say something about Ella Baker. You know, Ella Baker had a thing about organizing, and the test of radical democratic organizing, she used to say bluntly when she went into towns to organize, she said, I don't want to know if you're willing to get the lawyer or the preacher or the teacher out of jail. I want to know if the town drunk is somebody who you're also, you're fighting for inclusion, citizenship for everybody, or just the respectable members of a certain community. And so I still think there's that, constantly with us. I also hope unfortunately, I have to leave
Yeah, that's
soon.
all really good. No.
And I'm wondering if they have any questions for us
Yes.
before. I wouldn't leave if I didn't have to,
Right,
so
and
I'm not a
we
rude
wanna-
panelist.
Yeah, we want to open up for lots of questions, but if we can focus questions for Professor Ramsey, since she's the one who's leaving the soonest, that would be great, and then we will carry on. Yeah, go ahead.
Lisa Krim. Hey, Barb.
You were talking about politics and respectability. I'm just wondering, since it's also the 50th anniversary of the release of the Moynihan Report, the extent to which that, in fact, plays a role, particularly in not only sort of playing on those class divisions, but helping to undermine the idea of women in leadership positions by pathologizing single mothers
Yeah.
and their children.
Yeah, the hardest, I went to the Cleveland convening Black Lives Matter, and then there was two events in upstate New York just now of like 50 or 60 people, and the hardest conversations were around the question of gender and also sexuality. Queer folks who have been involved in this, Black Youth Project, for example, is a group of young organizers who say they organize through a queer color lens, and so how does intersectionality, how does women's leadership fit into this moment, and as you say, 50 years after the Moynihan Report? And I have to say, there's a number of ways to say it. One is that people like Gloria Richardson and Ella Baker and Rosa Parks have always been on the forefront in that, and not given credit, not recognized, and all that. But also, I think there's a kind of materialist analysis too. The ideological justification for neoliberalism has been on the backs of Black women. In other words, to pathologize poor single Black women has helped to justify the dismantling of a whole set of services that define this moment of the neoliberal state. And having people exiled from the economy, right, in this post-industrial age where you have robots doing what workers used to do, and then to have the state abandon people, right? How do you get people to swallow that? And it's not just racism. It's racism and sexism and this idea of a certain morality outside of which poor Black people exist. Poor Black people are either, immoral single mothers, or, even in this age, right, when a lot of rich white people are not getting married either and have kids, but there's a pathologizing of how that intersects with poverty. And then you're a gangbanger or a thug, which seems to be inconsistent with also being someone who has rights claims, right? A gangbanger, a thug, a single mother, it's like that and citizenship seem to have an oxymoronic relationship. So I think we should really take this 50th anniversary of the Moynihan Report to talk about the sinister nature of that intervention and how it informs so much, including Clinton's, 1996 Personal Responsibility Act. Remember what it was named, and to this very day. So thank you for bringing that up. Sorry for long-winded answer.
Before you leave, the last question I have you, and I was at Professor Ramsey's written a great article in Color Lines that if you sign in, I will send to all of you about Ella Baker along with these photos. But before you leave, I think one question that I'd love to hear about is, you're a historian, right? So part of your work
That's my day
is
job.
yeah, you're a historian, activist, and 800 other things. But part of your work is to delve in deep to know what are myths, what are truths. For everyday folks who aren't necessarily historians or very deep or know the people, how do they stay woke, right? Because I think we can say we don't want to be reproducing these myths, we don't want to, be overly sanitizing, but I think a lot of folks we don't know. And so I'm curious about what you think is, how do you have integrity in terms of telling other people's stories in a way when you don't necessarily have all the access? Like
Those are two questions.
Yeah.
The last question, how do you have integrity in telling other people's stories? You mean as historians, as biographers?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, a number of ways to enter into that, I think there are objective truths that may be controversial in some circles, but much truth is contested, right? And I think so, to appreciate that history is always contested, even how this moment is going to be defined. I think before a lot of you came in, I said, I worry a lot, and I started that color lines piece off saying, I worry about how this moment will be defined by future historians, and I imagine, the list of distortions that already are getting put in place. But I think, to be honest about what biases that we bring to a project is important. To be clear about what voices we are looking for and listening to. Because I wanted to tell a story of resistance. I didn't want to give you a sort of laundry list of everything she ever did. I didn't want to write a tome that transcribed her life, because that's boring. So I think that in terms of methodology and approach, and I think historians who have told stories that were difficult to tell have to, have that kind of perseverance that Jean talked about, which is to say, Ella Baker didn't leave breadcrumbs in the snow of how to tell her story. So that's one thing. But the other thing, I think, the bigger question about how do non-historians access history. I think that we try to tell stories that, I would say Jean and I and many in our cohort who are also activists try to write in an accessible form. So I'm not just writing for an academic audience, I'm writing for another audience, and I think to hold up that practice when you see it. I think there are a lot of projects that do popular history. Project South is a wonderful organization in Atlanta that does wonderful workshops on Ella Baker, and people can access that in a number of ways. And I think, many of us try to write for popular publications too. So I think all those are ways. Museum exhibitions, again, contested and sometimes limited, are other ways that non-historians access history. You're getting at something else, maybe I'm not
No, I think that's, yeah.
getting to it, but anyway, unfortunately, I always hate when panelists leave before, so I'm, no disrespect to my co-panelists. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to be with you for this amount of time. You can contact me if anybody wants to talk about Ella Baker, Barbara.Ransby@gmail, or at Barbara Ransby is the Twitter thing.
And we'll stay here, I think, for at least another 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
And I'll be in touch.
Right,
Okay.
great conference, thanks for including me.
Yeah. So, we'll continue asking. So the name of this panel was Low Ego, High Impact, or High Impact, Low Ego, whichever way you want to go on it. And I think that's been embraced by a lot of people within the movement as a different way of organizing. And I think sometimes when it's applied to women, historically, we are glorifying low ego when actually what was going on is they didn't have access to speak. And I'm sort of curious about takes on, does that feel like an accurate thing in terms of describing your role?
It may, because when I first started out, my schoolmates from Howard would write me because they claimed I was the shyest person on campus, and what on earth has happened to me? Obviously something happened to me, but it was true. I think on the first time the press came out and said they wanted to speak to us, and it pushed me out the door. And then after that, I think because we were so committed and so involved in trying to get rid of some of these changes, segregation, that you start forgetting yourself. But I don't think I did have, I mean, I think it was low ego, so I don't think, it may be that people that have, high extroverts and high ego may not necessarily be perfect for this kind of work, or somebody that always wants to be seen. And that goes back to Ella Baker and James Warman's thing about not liking charismatic people, charismatic leaders. Mm-hmm. They can preach and do this and do that, And that's it. They may not really have full commitment of the movement because they're more into projecting their personalities and surrounding themselves with people. And I think in terms of the student movement and student part of the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, that was true. And it was actually, I guess what may be called low ego people that did the work. And then for me, it may have been, I think not only being, I guess, shy to begin with, in my family, I couldn't get up and make speeches. And they used to try and train you in Sunday school, you know, parts. I couldn't do any of that. And they always used to tell me, well, you never know in life, you may have to get up and make and this was extemporaneous speeches. But men and women both could do that. And of course, I didn't use that word in my life. So I always had to have somebody that could speak and the other was singing. I couldn't carry a tune, so I always had to be sure somebody was there. The stick was there, they could lead the singing. We didn't do a lot of singing, but they would, you know, those two defects I had. But in terms of having to meet with people at all levels of the government, I think something must have happened to me because that didn't bother me. I mean, it didn't bother me to say what I thought going to do. Of course, I wonder about that because after I did the Democracy Now! Here around the March, and in today's framework, a lot of the websites and stuff talked about gender and how they treated women. I think in my and our cases, and women in Cambridge, I think where that was true was not ignoring us in a face-to-face, but ignoring what we could do or what threat we might be to them on a national level. But by the time that we got to the federal level, we needed the Department of Justice in those agencies in Washington. It was too late because we had the power over men in the streets that weren't coming out, as they said. So they tried, they would do things, and you all may experience that. Like we would be sitting in their offices having a negotiating session, and they would call Roy Wilkins and perform on them and ask them, could they stop us? And of course they couldn't, because we came from we were spokesmen for the people, what they had decided they wanted to do. And Foreman, of course Foreman they could never talk to because they always told him from the office, oh, he's traveling. Oh, he's on his way to California. We can't get in touch with him. But they tried all kinds of ways, and so there was, the doors, there was nothing they could do. They had to either deal with those problems and or not.
Do you want to explain the March on Washington and what happened, just because everybody might not know?
Oh, that's right. Oh, yes. The March on Washington, there was some of us along with Malcolm and organization here, the tenants organization here in New York, and 4 or 5 people that wanted to go to the March in Washington within our framework, and that was to stop a code, to lay in the streets, to do that kind of direct action thing. And of course, in the end, by the time of the major 5, because they just barely let, I think, Martin and Snick in, the major civil rights organizations, agreed to have this other march. So in Cambridge, stage because there were some people that wanted to go on the Eastern Shore. So I was supposed to coordinate that in terms of finding buses, which we did. But I don't remember now whether I intended to just go or not, but about a week before the march, way late, everybody else had been asked and the program was set up. They called me and asked me to come to the march and be on the platform. Now, there's a discussion going on today, excuse me, about what happened. They told me 2 minutes and not to wear jeans.
Wow.
She hasn't dealt. It looks bad, but it's really more popular for her than the public things. Okay. Okay, excuse me. In any event, they asked me not to wear jeans. So then, and to dress up, so me and my family went all across the Eastern Shore Road. Because I was looking for a skirt. They didn't have skirts and jean stuff like that. And I finally found one with some suspenders, and I wore that with a frilly shirt.
It was a jean skirt.
Yeah.
To make the point. So, we went, they paid the expenses, they said they would come and pick me up at the hotel. And they did, but it seemed to me they were running late. In any event, which almost after the march down became a big argument. And they came and took me to the march tent. There wasn't anybody in that march tent but women. So after I'd been there, she said, spoke, and after I'd been there for about a minute or two, Dorothy Height gets up and says, well, we're going to the ladies' room and we'll be back. So I said, fine, because I had just barely gotten there. They had been there, that morning. So they did that. And I was doing a satellite interview when Mayor Rustin comes up to me and says, what are you doing here? So I said, I'm waiting for the women to come back. What do you mean, what am I doing here? And he says, no, everybody's up on the stage. And so I thought, oh, well, in excitement then, I was not analyzing what was going on. So in the car, he says, so he took me up to the stage. And also at that point, Lena Horne was taking Rosa Parks around in front of the stage to European satellite stations and saying, this is the woman who started the movement. It wasn't done, she didn't. So anyhow, I stopped and helped her do that. And then went up on the stage, but when I got on the stage, and this was kind of, for me also, with Lena Horne and Josephine Baker, and it was kind of exciting too. But when I got up there, Josephine Baker says to me, you need to raise hell. They took your chair. Well, apparently they had chairs on the stage with banners across them with people's names. So I said to her, I don't need to have this anyhow. Let me go back here because I see a lawyer back here I need to talk to. But they called my name and people said, no, go up there. And when I got to the, and since I didn't like to speak anyhow, when I got to the platform, I really was going to say, just stay here until that bill passes. Don't go home. And Diane Nash and I had looked at the civil rights bill, and as it was at that point, formulated. Everything was voluntary. Oh, yes, this should be done, but you can volunteer to do it. So I just thought it wasn't worth the paper to be written on. But anyhow, they snatched the mic. And that was that. During the reenactment of the march, then they became a whole thing. No, that wasn't true. They didn't have a separate march for the women. And everything I look at on the internet going back, first place is the men, and you don't see any women in there. The second place is the women came from a different, not highway, street, diverged into the thing. So I guess that was, I understand it on one level, but the other, I thought, how, could they publicly do this? And this really had nothing to do with the fact that there was a group of us that were going to, that thought we should do civil disobedience in that term. In Cambridge, in terms of things, it may have gone on before the movement, it may be going on after the movement, but there was not that kind of gender kind of discrimination going on during the movement. The roles were interactive. I mean, sometimes the women were home when the guns at night. So you didn't get that, because people at SNCC tell me today, when I used to come down to the meetings and they talk about the various stuff about gender, it was clear to them that I didn't understand any of that. And I didn't. I think that also, the other reason was, in my family, I was the only grandchild for maybe 15, 16, 17 years. And black folks have to use what they have. So I think the men in my family brought me up and expected me to do other things that they would probably have expected a male grandchild. They finally got to it, but at that time, until I was about 17, 18, they weren't healed. So that probably, and I think my mother and grandmother, they didn't like, what was the word?
Discriminate against you?
No, there didn't seem to be any discrimination going on among men and women.
I've been told we have 5 minutes, so we'll take questions, and we'll also be here afterwards if there's questions, either Professor Theo Harris or Ms. Richardson. Yeah, go ahead. And maybe you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
I'm Joyelle. I just graduated from law school and I'm from the Eastern Shore. So I'm
Oh, you are from the Eastern Shore?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So very much aware of your work. And my question is about, I guess, more practical, because coming back to Chestertown, which is where I'm from, and seeing the same disparities and speaking to the people, they realize the disparities are there, but very few of them will actually stand up and do something. And I think maybe it's because on the Eastern Shore, they feel like Black Lives Matter is a Baltimore thing, or like that's happening over there. We don't need to do that stuff over here. So my question is, how would you, since you know the Eastern Shore mentality, how would you help encourage Black people today, especially for younger people, to get more involved and not just pontificate about it and talk about it, but actually want to organize? Because right now it's really hard, and I'm basically the only one in that area trying to get some type of involvement.
I don't know, but there is one thing in Cambridge. There was a guy that wrote his thesis for PhD at the University of Maryland, and he talked the same thing about how blacks are satisfied. They're this and that. His paper wasn't necessarily about movements and stuff, but what happened was when my cousin told those two sick people on the bus, you should drop somebody off in Cambridge, this is, it's so bad. And they did. And the first rally they had at the church, this was after they set in and been beaten and stuff, there were 600 people there. And if somebody had asked any of us before that, when people had gone out to a rally about discrimination and racism, and that quickly, without people running around town, trying to move people out, I've been surprised. I think maybe sometimes it's a breaking point, but also I guess, somebody has to, start the stuff. And I think usually it's younger people. I mean, I was a whatever you call it because I was like 39. But I didn't start. I mean, my daughter and her friends started. But I don't know what's going on the show today because I became just going down. I think there was the manager, the black mayor whose father is up there. You're taking the power away from her. And then I think the public housing that we got as part of our demands is being privatized. And those 600 people are going, unless they changed in the last month, are going to be out in the street. So I don't know whether that will create an uproar or not. Because like Harrison said, across the shore, a lot of the people, when I came along, they had race men. So no matter how well they did or how little they did, and some of them were slaves, they fought for people, for everybody, in the community, for people to have a better life. And I'm not sure that after the movement, some of the people I saw that got the jobs or were on committees and stuff were the same old people that didn't speak to us in the movement. And as I said, that's what's in the warrant itself. And I don't know if there was anything I could have done about that, but it didn't really soak in. And so I guess it's a hard thing, but as I said, sometimes people seem like really okay with everything. I also don't think that those ordinary or traditional organizations like the NAACP and stuff are going to help energize people like that.
There's a question right there. Yeah.
My name's Brianne. I'm currently in law school in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown. And I wonder how anger and righteous anger have played out in your life and your career. Because, you have the trope of the angry black woman, and I'm interested.
Oh, I don't care about that.
And so I wonder how anger has sort of informed your organizing and your career and your life, and how you've used anger in any kind of way, and if that's played a role in your life.
I'm not sure I can say. I was angry, but I mean, I really cared. People, I don't care now. I mean, I saw an argument the other week about that. Because if you're angry and it's a human reaction, then you're angry. They said I had a sharp tongue. I don't know what that meant, but all other, unless they're movement people, all other people seem to me, at least on the TV and stuff, to talk sharply and act like they're and nobody says anything about them. I think they like to talk if you're achieving anything or you're fighting for something. I think they like to talk about the angry woman. And it really is, it's not just angry woman. It goes back to Amos and Annie, they call them sapphires. So that's a part of the racism too. I don't know whether that answers what we say, but anyhow, that's what we are. But no, don't be afraid. If it's rightful anger. And then there's something else, and I think you all have been doing it in your organizing, is in your personal space, in the Cambridge movement, you may go to church or be any kind of denomination. In the movement, that you did not bring that, because denominations are competitive. Fraternal organizations, they are competitive. So whether you are Elks or Mason or what, don't bring it in here. I mean, that's fine. You can go in and see your friends in those kinds of frameworks and try to get them to come over with you and fight, fine. But don't let the leaders of those people think they can come and tell you what to do. So in a lot of those things, we didn't tell people, oh, don't go to church. But don't bring your denominational fights and who's going to have the best concert or whatever into our, into this stuff. And actually, in one time, what had happened with the churches is when they shut us out when we refused to vote, is the women told them in the churches, 5 different denominations. Okay, you're going to shut them out of the churches. We aren't putting money in the Sunday plate. And they opened up again. Which meant that they weren't as convinced of what, they were doing. They were trying to control us.
He had a hand. We'll do 2 more questions.
I'll make it quick. My name is Tam Willis. I'm in the DC area, and I'm a military lawyer. Just for the Air Force. So I just had a comment and maybe a question or two for you when you were talking about Rosa Parks. It was very interesting and surprising for me to hear you say that the focus went on criminal justice, at least in the beginning, because it seemed like it shifted quickly, at least when the movement was at the forefront, or when it was being publicized, the focus shifted to voter rights and education and economics. And we have been brutally reminded that there's a lot of work to be done in criminal justice. And I think the war on drugs is a catalyst for the fact that the prison population is 50% black and only 12% of the population. So the question is, I guess, what was the reason for that shift from criminal justice to everything else? If you have any insight on that, that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, so Rosa Parks keeps working on criminal justice for the whole, really till she dies in 2005. And the second half of Rosa Parks' life, in fact, more of her life is spent in Detroit. They have to leave Montgomery about 8 months after the boycott ends because they literally can't find work. They're still getting death threats. And so she moves to Detroit, and they still struggle for many, many years. She has trouble finding work. She develops ulcers. So it's a very hard time. And then, 1965, she's hired by John Conyers. She supports his first bid for Congress when he's this kind of upstart. And so she's working, and one of the first things he does is he hires her. She's going to work in Conyers' office for the next 27 years. But she's also going to be, particularly with this new economic, they were extremely poor, and basically between 55 and 60. But after the Conyers job makes things a bit easier, right? She gets even more active in and alongside the growing Black Power movement in the city and nationally. And one of the issues they're working on is criminal justice issues. And I say this because one of the ideas for this panel was the ways that the histories we get versus the histories we need, right? And so one of the things that to me is really troubling is the ways that we have memorialized civil rights movement as about public accommodations, voting, and so then it's like a kind of happy ending, right? It's like Rosa to the Voting Rights Act, right? And so it's kind of up and away narrative. And I think that's how she gets used, right? So when she dies in 2005, right, it's really and She lies in the Capitol. She's the first civilian ever to get such an honor. Right? First woman ever to get such an honor. But in many ways, I think that funeral became a kind of spectacle of laying racism to rest, right? So it's like, look how great we are. This person who was arrested on the bus is now in the panel. But that requires stripping all this other stuff out. So what was the actual Rosa Parks doing up to the end of her life? She was talking about things like criminal justice, right? She was talking about things like, she was always an internationalist, right? So thinking about kind of the U.S. and the world, right? She was always very committed to the power of history and changing the curriculum and kind of schooling, right? But if we reduce it to public accommodations, to desegregation and voting, it looks like, it's good to go. And so I think a lot of that work continued on. And to me, one of the very hard things as we get to this moment is what I would like is for some of get all this media attention, right, and yet nobody is forcing the question of like, people have been saying this for years, organizing for years, right? And yet they start the clock now as if there weren't organizers last year or the year before, talking about Kamani Gray, if we're just talking in this city, talking about Sean Bell, organizing about Sean, not just talking, organizing. And to me, there's a danger that we don't say, look, there have been movements and people, and many of the people in this movement have been talking about this for years and working on this for years. And I think we need to show these continuities and we need to grapple with these movements precisely because I think they force a different kind of accountability, right? It's like, people have been saying and organizing around this for years. Why does this persist?
And I think the larger thing from not the specific administration in general, is in charge of that. Because it was very amazing to me in Ferguson and in Baltimore when they put the National Guard out and just let them stand around. They didn't know what to do with them. So I went on the internet and I thought, well, they have, in terms of civil rights movements, they have had it longer than a day or two of them, deploying their National Guard. And they stayed there until there was some resolution. I went all over the internet, just looked at National Guard and how various things about how long they've been in various places in this country. There was nothing about Cambridge in the 18 months, which it was the longest time they had spent in a civilian city. Just wiped out. And then I knew that it wasn't by accident, because everything else is on the internet. And nobody said anything about what they were going to do with the National Guard, or nothing about that. What they had done in the same kind of situation, as if they had wiped that out too. And also, I could never anymore, although he became police commissioner, find out anything about the general of the National Guard, of Gelston then. That's why, so I think there's certain things in passing stuff on now that they're weeding out, and they're weeding about it because they're afraid of it.
There's one last question.
So don't give up.
Sorry, I was like listening and I was like really taking it in. First of all, thank you so much for this discussion. Something that I've been grappling with when getting into this work is just, so last week I went to Cleveland for the Movement for Black Lives, and I don't know if you saw it on the news or whether it was disseminated, but some skinheads actually came on campus and started attacking us. And
I'm sorry.
What'd you say? Okay. Later on that night, I think I was just walking the streets of Cleveland with my friends, and I remember just some skinheads like just came riding on the bike towards us, and like really just looking at us in a way that just seemed really threatening to me. And I remember just like, there was like a tattoo emblazoned across one of the skinheads' dress top, like it was like hate. And I really, at that moment, I really grappled with the reality that I might just get killed, that I might just die. And it was terrifying. Like, I know we talk about writing the articles and being in marches with people, but when you are really on the ground in these spaces where you are invoking legitimate fear, and not legitimate, when you are evoking fear in people that stand to, like, in their minds, lose.
Yeah.
When we gain our rights, your life can be threatened. So, Ms. Richardson, do you think about that? Have you thought about that when you were?
Yes.
And how did you do?
Well, I knew if they got me, that somebody was gonna get them too.
So that.
I mean, that was set up, I mean, that was, there were like 2 movements going on there at the time. Ours, that was non-violent and whatever, and another movement. And it wasn't that the other people that provided our backup were against what we were doing or whatever, but they were there to see that we were not doing it. But so, how crazy that is, I thought, well, if you attack me or if you kill me, something will go on. And in fact, by the time of our death, there had been 12 people, white folks shot, and no black folks. So they had organized, I guess, like we thought we were organized, not violent. They had organized because there were a lot of men there that had been in World War I and II. And at one point they even had, I understand, they had gotten Red Cross type supply bandages and stuff, and sent them in case they needed it. So it was pretty bad, but that may not have been sensible of me, but anyhow, that's how I felt after they get so nasty, I guess, and dangerous. When we went to Washington to sign the agreement, when they took those of us from CMAC up there, they had to every mile have state police truck and hand us off from Cambridge to I guess they thought they didn't want anything to happen to us while we were supposed to be going to see them. That was scary, but I think most people in the movement, they realized that might happen. Those people of any age. And for a while, it was very, I think sometimes I tell people, I think maybe it's like soldiers that go away and they probably, when they first signed up, were scared, and then they keep on until they get and absorb that, and then they go on after they aren't antsy about it, but that it must be the same kind.
Okay, I'm gonna formally end it here, but we will stay afterwards. And I want to thank Ms. Richardson, and if you all didn't know, Ms. Richardson is 94 years old, for coming